Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we will be analyzing a thrilling encounter from the 2024 FIDE World Chess Championship where Gukesh Domaraju scored his first ever classical win over world champion Ding Liren, leveling the match at 1.1-1.1 going into the first rest day. In this game, Gukesh set some tricky openings for Ding, and though Ding solved all the problems early on and was poised to take control of the game, a critical blunder from Ding changed everything. Ding was forced to give up a bishop for two pawns. Though the conversion seemed tricky for Gukesh at first, it was a time trouble ending for Ding, which led to the collapse in the endgame. Let's go into the detail of this thrilling game and analyze critical moments that led to Gukesh's great win. Stay tuned. Gukesh starts with d4, central setup and flexibility. Ding reacts with knight f6, knight move followed by potential central encounter. This is a very sane and conventional response. Gukesh develops his knight with knight f3 supporting the d4 pawn and preparing to take control of the center. Ding plays d5 immediately challenging the center and the central pawn of Gukesh. Gukesh continues with c4, the queen's gambit, offering a pawn to challenge Ding's central pawn on d5. Ding responds with e6, a solid move supporting the d5 pawn and preparing to develop the light squared bishop. Gukesh captures the pawn on d5 with cx d5 and Ding recaptures with ex d5, maintaining a strong pawn structure in the center. The tension remains and both sides are aiming for a favorite position as they continue to develop. Gukesh develops the knight to nc3, attacking the d5 pawn and reinforcing control of the center. Ding responds with c6, reinforcing the d5 pawn. Gukesh plays queen c2. This move indirectly prepares for kingside castling. Ding plays g6, signaling his intent to fianchetto the dark squared bishop, a hallmark of King's Indian defense, aiming for a flexible structure that puts pressure on Gukesh's center. Gukesh plays h3, a prophylactic move to prevent any piece from coming to g4, which could harass the knight on f3 or the bishop on c1. Ding responds with bishop f5, developing the bishop to an active square, where it exerts pressure on the e4 square and supports a future kingside fianchetto. Gukesh plays queen b3 immediately, putting pressure on Ding's b7 pawn and asking him to deal with it. Ding's responds with queen b6, defending the b7 pawn and preventing any immediate exchanges of queens, which would simplify the position. Gukesh plays g4, pushing his kingside pawn aggressively, thereby gaining space. It also prepares for further expansion on the king side. Ding retaliates by capturing the queen x b3, and Gukesh recaptures with ax b3, opening up a file for potential rook activity. Ding now plays bishop c2, putting his bishop on a good square where it challenges Gukesh's rook and a1 and limits the ability of white's pawns to move. Gukesh developed his dark squared bishop to bishop f4, taking him at the important e5 square and possibly attacking Ding's weak pawn on the queen side. Ding responds with h5, an aggressive expansion on the king side. This move suggests that Ding intends to capture space on the king side and challenge Gukesh's pawn structure. Gukesh move rg1, activating his rook and placing it on the open g file to be supporting the pawn on g4 and eventually creating attacking chances on the king side. Ding captures the pawn with hxg4, opening the h file and taking a pawn on the king side. Now Ding has a pawn majority and open lines to attack. Gukesh takes the pawn back, hxg4, and controls the pawn. He ensures his king side structure remains clear. Ding starts develop his knight with knight bd7, which helps to support the center and also may push the knight from there to more active lines like e5 or f8. Gukesh moves knight d2, developing the knight and opening up future central ideas such as potentially pushing e4. This move also clears the way for the light squared bishop to move. Ding responds with rook g8, placing his rook on the g file where it can put pressure on Gukesh's king and support the advance of the g4 pawn. Gukesh pushes with g5, advancing the g pawn to gain space and try to undermine Ding's kingside pawn structure. The g5 push also restricts the movement of Ding's knight and could create future attacking chances. Ding responds with knight h5, bringing his knight to a more active square and preparing to launch a counter attack on Gukesh's kingside. Gukesh takes his bishop back to bh2, with it still safe and creating pressure on the king side of Ding. The bishop on h2 is well positioned to be able to support later attacks or to keep an eye on the important f4 square. Ding moves his rook to rh8, doubling up on the h file and increasing the pressure on Gukesh's king. Gukesh plays f3, which further strengthens his center and gains control over important squares such as e4. This also helps him in supporting g4 and also prevents any knight jump from Ding, which might disturb the position of white Ding. Ding plays a knight g7, which changes the position of his knight to a safe square to support the attack on the king side. Gukesh develops with g3, placing the bishop on an active square where it keeps an eye on black's central pawn and also contribute to the king side defense. The bishop might also support the advance of Gukesh's pawn on the king side. Ding responds with rook h5, an unexpected and I think inaccurate move. Gukesh pushes with e4, striking in the center and aiming to open lines for his pieces. This is a key move to challenge Ding's position and create spaces for his pieces to become more active. Ding responds with dxe4, opening up the center and challenging Gukesh's pawn structure. Gukesh regains the pawn with fxe4, further cementing his grip over the center and opening possibilities for enhancing his lead. Ding develops his knight to ne6, placing it on a more aggressive square from which it will be able to support both the king side and central attacks. This was a very dynamic game with both sides building up tension on both sides of the board. Kukesh managed to pose problem for Ding in the opening and middle game, gaining some initiative on the queen side and king side. Meanwhile, Ding was pushing for counterplay with his king side expansion, but Gukesh's precise moves and strategic ideas led to an edge that ultimately put pressure on Ding's position, especially when the time troubles came into play. Now Gukesh plays c1, activating his rook and placing it on the open c file. The rook is now targeting Ding's c7 bishop and putting additional pressure on Ding position. The c file can be powerful avenue for an attack in such position. Ding answers with knight x d4, taking the d4 pawn with his knight and trying to reduce complexity by getting rid one of Gukesh's aggressive central pawns. The central tension is released, but Ding's knight is now vulnerable. Gukesh plays bf2, bishop f2, move his bishop to a more secure square and keeps it on the long diagonal. The bishop is also supporting the advance of his pawns and exerts pressure on the queen side and the center. Ding played bishop g7, develops his bishop now control important squares in the center and may become very active in defense or even a counter attack. Gukesh plays knight e2, moving his knight to support key central squares and possibly to begin the advance toward the king side. It also opens space for the knight to shift to more active squares like f4. Ding played knight x b3, that takes another pawn and thereby creates a passed pawn on the square b3. This gives Ding a material advantage, but Gukesh still has active piece and queen side pressure. Gukesh captures c2, bishop with rxc2, removing the passed pawn and still keeping hold of the c file. A blunder by Ding sacrificed bishop for a pawn. Ding responds with knight x d2, taking Gukesh's knight and taking away one of white's major attacking pieces. By this action, Ding levels the material difference, but Gukesh remained with good central control. King regains the knight with King x d2, taking his king closer to the center. This forces the king on a safer square and gives more scope for the rest of his pieces to come into play in the endgame. Ding plays knight e5, pushing the knight out of and putting it on a strategic central square. The knight now dominates many important squares and attacks the opponent's pawn structure, perhaps forcing Gukesh to go into defense. Gukesh plays knight d4, centralizing his knight and trying to take control of more critical squares. This makes the knight more active in attacking. Ding's position, especially targeting the pawn on his c6 and other important squares. Ding plays rook d8, putting his rook on the open d file. This move prepares to defend against threats on the d4 square and start to mobilize his pieces for counterplay. Ding's rook is now active and the game is moving into a more tactical phase. Gukesh plays king e2, moving his king towards the center and preparing for potential endgame scenarios. The move also opens up the possibility for his rooks to be more active, especially as the game progresses into a complex endgame. The king is safe for now, but is gradually stepping into a more central position where it can help support pawns and pieces. Ding plays rook h2, shifting his rook to the second rank and getting ready to put pressure on the king side of Gukesh. The rook on h2 can be an ominous piece or creating threat against the king of Gukesh if the game evolves into a more tactical mode. Gukesh moves bishop g2, which retreats a bishop to a safer square from the corner and improves its scope since the bishop now controls the long diagonal and supports future plans. It's a solid move with a guarantee that a bishop remain active at any time of king side. Ding's play a6, a silent move that prepares to advance the b pawn or protect the b7 pawn. The move also ding some more space on the king side where he can play freely without the pressure of the opponent's piece on him. Gukesh plays b3, reinforcing his queen side and potentially opening up the b4 square for his pieces. It is a solid defensive move in ensuring that the queen side remains safe, but it is also a preparatory move in advanced pawns and improving piece activity later in the game. Ding plays rook d7, doubling rooks on the d file, enhancing the activity of his rooks, exerting pressure on the d4 knight and central structure of Gukesh. Ding continues to seek ways to create an imbalance or reduce to a more acceptable endgame. Gukesh plays rook c1, pushing his rook to the open c file. This puts some pressure on Ding's pawn on c6, a potential weakness. The rook also keeps an eye on the queen side where some pawn break or tactical opportunities could occur in the future. Gukesh is slowly gaining an advantage as he mobilizes his rooks and takes control of key files. Ding's play king e7, moving his king closer to the center, which is the general move in the endgame. This move also ensures that the king is safely out of possible checks or attacks, while it can later assist in the defense of important pawns in the square. The king is more active and ready to support the rest of Ding's pieces. Gukesh plays his rook to rcd1, further strengthening the open d file for himself and making pressure on Ding's position. This move brings more activity for Gukesh rook and prepares to dominate the central file. With this, the rook in a good place to assist in the accomplishment of Gukesh's own pawn. Ding plays king e8, moving his king away from a less safe position. This is an addition makes the king safe, but possibly also indicating that Ding has run out of counterplay and is preparing to just defend passively at this point. Gukesh moves his bishop to bg3, which places it on a much more central and active squares. The bishop now puts pressure on the h2 rook and is helping to support the king side. The move is also useful to control key squares in the center, and this is an ideal position for a bishop in the endgame. Ding responds with rook h5, putting his rook on the 5th rank. To increase the pressure, his rook on h5 aims to create threat against Gukesh king side pawns, but Gukesh is well placed and can easily neutralize the threats on the king side. Gukesh moves his knight to f3, so his knight is put on a more active square. The knight move also serves to defend important squares and keep pressure on the king side while possibly preparing for future central break or defensive actions. Ding seizes the knight with nxf3, taking a significant piece of the board. This trade slightly reduces the complexity of the position, but it also leaves Ding with fewer pieces to play, and Gukesh has an edge in material and position. King xf3, Gukesh recaptures, leaving his king centralized and supporting his pieces in the endgame. The king is now an active participant able to support both sides of the board. The recapture also maintains material balance and strengthens Gukesh's position overall. Ding responds with bishop d4, placing his bishop on an active square, aiming to restrict the movement of Gukesh's pieces and create some counterplay. The bishop on d4 is well placed to challenge the g1 rook. Gukesh moves his rook to rh1. This move signals that Gukesh is keeping the pressure on Ding's weakness and is aiming to dominate the king side. Ding captures with rxg5, eliminating one of Gukesh's pawn and simplifying the position slightly. While the capture reduces the material imbalance, Ding's position is still under intense pressure and Gukesh remains in control of the game. Gukesh moves his bishop to h3, attacking Ding's d7 rook and adding pressure to Ding already weakening king side. The bishop is now ideally placed to exert dominance on the board and is cutting off key squares from Ding's remaining pieces. Ding plays f5, pushing his pawn and tries to seize the initiative on the king side. Nevertheless, this pawn move unmasks the more weakness in the Ding position and present more tactical levers that Gukesh could exploit. Gukesh moves his bishop to f4, continuing to apply pressure against the king side. It's well placed to challenge control of the central and king side squares and deny Ding possibilities. Now Ding has very much less time, around 3 minutes 50 seconds, and you have to make moves, many moves. Gukesh. Now Ding tries to again with rook h5, bringing his rook into a more active position. Though it's pretty obvious now that Gukesh has a better game. His rook on h5 is going to continue to apply pressure on the king side pawn, but it's too much for Ding to overcome in such a dominating position with an extra material advantage. And after this move, Gukesh wins as the Ding Liren time has ended. Ding Liren, the world champion, was left facing a severe time pressure. At time, he was left with just 8 minutes for 11 moves, and then eventually saw him running out of time and lose. Ding was under huge clock pressure from the start, and then as the game moved into the middle stages, he really had no leeway left. By the end, he was compelled to make 4 moves in just 5 seconds, a scenario that is nearly impossible to handle at the highest level of chess. He lost on time and gave Gukesh a dramatic and well deserved victory. Congratulations, Gukesh.